You are standing at the edge of the family photo. You are the one holding the camera while everyone else smiles. You are the sibling whose birthday was remembered, but whose heart was never really known. Maybe you have spent your whole life watching other people get the promotion, the proposal, or the praise, while you stayed in the shadow of someone else's light. You check the group chat and realize they went to dinner without you. You sit at the meeting and realize your idea was only heard when someone else said it. It is a quiet, stinging kind of pain. It is the feeling of being a backup plan in a world that only rewards the first pick. Maybe you have learned to be the funny one just so people would notice you are in the room. Maybe you have stopped sharing your dreams because you know they will be compared to someone else's reality. Maybe you have become the person who helps everyone else succeed, while your own goals sit on a shelf, gathering dust. You have spent years wondering if there is something wrong with you. You wonder if you are simply invisible to the world, or worse, if you are invisible to God. Let me tell you something that will change the way you see your entire life. Your invisibility was not a mistake. It was a strategy. God did not forget to choose you first. He chose to hide you. He kept you out of the spotlight because what He is building inside of you would have been ruined by the wrong kind of attention. Too early. The world thinks being picked last is a sign of low value. In the kingdom of God, being picked last is often a sign of high security. God does not put His most valuable treasures on the front porch for everyone to walk by. He keeps them in the secret place. Think about the way the world works. Everyone wants to be the first pick. Everyone wants the gold medal. But when everyone is looking at you, you start to perform. You start to care more about how you look than who you are. You become a product of other people's expectations. But when you are the one who is never chosen first, you have a freedom that the favorites will never understand. You have the freedom to grow in the dark, where only God can see you. You are not being ignored. You are being incubated. There was a boy in the Bible who knew exactly how you feel. His name was David. When the prophet Samuel came to his father's house to find the next king of Israel, David's father didn't even think to call him from the fields. He brought out the oldest son, the tall one, the strong one. He brought out 7 sons, and David wasn't even on the list. He was out with the sheep, doing the work no one else wanted to do. In 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 11, Samuel has to ask, "Are these all the sons you have?" David's own father didn't see a king when he looked at his youngest son. He saw a shepherd boy. He saw a chore runner. He saw someone who wasn't worth the interruption. But while his brothers were being pampered at the dinner table, David was killing lions and bears in the silence. He was learning how to trust God when there was no audience to applaud him. He was being prepared for a crown in a place where no one could see him. If you feel like the world has passed you over, it is because God is doing the same thing with you. You were not rejected. You were reserved. Number 1, the view from the periphery. God gave you the eyes of an observer to see what the favorites miss. Let's start with the truth no one wants to say out loud. When you are the center of attention, you rarely see anything but the spotlight. The people who are always chosen first, the ones who are always the favorites, often develop a kind of spiritual blindness. They are so busy being seen that they never learn how to see. But you have spent your life on the edges. You have spent your life watching from the back of the room, standing at the kitchen counter, while the rest of the family sat at the table. or listening to the conversation instead of leading it. You know exactly what I am talking about. You are the one who notices when the tone of a person's voice shifts just a fraction of a degree. You are the one who sees the flicker of sadness in a coworker's eyes that everyone else misses because they are too busy talking about themselves. You see the person standing alone at the party and you feel their discomfort in your own bones. You notice the dust on the shelf, the tension in the hallway, and the truth behind the "I'm fine" that everyone else accepts. At face value, this isn't just a personality trait. It is a gift of discernment that God only gives to those He keeps in the shadows. Think about the last time you were in a crowded room. You weren't the one holding court. You weren't the one everyone was trying to impress. Instead, you were the one observing the dynamics. You saw who was being genuine and who was performing. You saw the needs that were being ignored because you were not busy being the main character. You became the person who actually understood the story. God gave you this gaze of the outsider because He is preparing you to be a person of profound wisdom. You cannot lead people you haven't truly seen, and you cannot heal wounds you haven't noticed. Sound familiar? This is exactly what we see in the life of a woman named Leah. In Genesis chapter 29, we meet two sisters. Rachel was the beautiful one, the one Jacob loved instantly, the one everyone chose first. Leah was the older sister, and the Bible describes her in verse 17 by saying she had weak eyes. For years, scholars have debated what that meant, but in the context of her life, it meant she was the one who was overlooked. She was the unloved wife. She lived in a house where she was the constant second choice. But if you read the story closely, you realize that while Rachel was caught up in the drama of her beauty and her status, Leah was the one who was truly seeing God. Every time Leah gave birth to a son, she gave for him a name that proved she was watching God's hand move in her life. She named one son Reuben, which means, "The Lord has seen my misery." She named another Judah, which means this time I will praise the Lord. Number 2, the muscle built in the silence. God developed a resilience in you that requires no human fuel. Let me say this straight. People who are always chosen first often become fragile. When you are the favorite, you get used to the wind being at your back. You get used to doors being opened for you before you even reach for the handle. You are fed on a steady diet of "good job," and you are so talented. But because those people are fueled by the applause of others, they often crumble the moment. The room goes quiet. They don't know how to move forward when no one is watching, because they have never had to. But you have been running on an internal engine for a long time. Think about your life. You have had to figure things out on your own because there was no one hovering over your shoulder to guide you. You have walked into rooms where no one knew your name, and you had to earn every bit of respect you received. When you failed, you didn't have a cheering section to tell you it was okay. You had to sit in that failure, process it, and decide to get back up simply because you refused to stay down. You have spent years doing the hard, repetitive, boring work of life without a single person telling you that you were doing a great job. You know this feeling. You have worked the late shifts when no one else wanted them. You have finished the projects that someone else got the credit for. You have shown up to the family gathering and served the food and washed the dishes, and then driven home in the dark without a single thank you to the world. This looks like you are being taken advantage of. But in the spiritual realm, God is building a level of endurance in you that the favorites will never possess. He is making you unoffendable. He is making you independent of the opinions of people. If you didn't need their praise to start, you won't need their permission to finish. Sound familiar? We see this exact pattern in the life of a man named Gideon. In the book of Judges, chapter 6, we find Gideon threshing wheat in a winepress. Now, you don't thresh wheat in a winepress. You do it on a hilltop where the wind can catch the chaff. But Gideon was hiding. He was afraid. When the angel of the Lord appeared to him, Gideon's response in verse 15 was very telling. He said,
Do not be afraid.
"My clan is the Omi, weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house." Gideon wasn't just the last choice of his nation. He was the last choice of his own family. He was the least. He was the one who was left to do the menial labor, while the Midianites were raiding the land. He didn't have a resume. He didn't have a following. He didn't even have his father's confidence. But God didn't look at Gideon's lack of status. God looked at the grit Gideon had developed by surviving as the least in a time of national crisis. God called him a mighty warrior while he was still hiding in a hole in the ground. Why? Because God knew that a man who had survived being overlooked by his own brothers wouldn't be intimidated by an army of thousands. His strength wasn't in his reputation. It was in his roots. If you have spent your life being the one who had to work harder just to get half as far, do not be bitter. You were not being punished. You were being prepared. God was letting you build a spiritual and emotional stamina that will allow you to stand firm when the favorites fall away. You have learned how to feed yourself on the Word of God when no one else was encouraging you. You have learned how to pray when the heavens felt like brass. You have developed a holy stubbornness that says, "I am going to follow Jesus." Number 3, the protection of the shadow. God kept you hidden to save your soul from the poison of public expectation. Let's be honest. There is the hidden danger in being the one everyone notices first. When you are the golden child, the favorite student, or the person who always gets the lead role, you begin to live for the reflection in other people's eyes. You start to perform. You learn how to shapeshift into whatever version of yourself will keep the praise coming. You spend so much energy maintaining your image that you never actually have the chance to find your true identity. You become a hollow shell of expectations, terrified of the day when people might stop looking. You have seen this happen to others, haven't you? You watch the siblings or the friends who were chosen first struggle under the weight of always having to be perfect. You saw them panic when they made a single mistake. You saw them lose their original design because they were too busy being what the world demanded they be. But while they were under the hot glare of the spotlight, you were in the cool safety of the shadow. You were allowed to be weird. You were allowed to have interests that didn't make sense to anyone else. You were allowed to fail in private, to cry in private, and to grow in private. Maybe you spent your teenage years alone in your room, reading books that shaped your mind, or writing in journals that no one will ever see. Maybe you spent your weekends walking in the woods or working on a hobby that your parents didn't understand. To the people around you, it looked like you were just the quiet one. But God was using that lack of attention to preserve your original signature. He was making sure that when He finally called you forward, you would be a person of substance. not a person of performance. You don't have to look around the room to see how you should act. You already know who you are because you spent your most formative years with only God as your audience. Maybe that is you. Think about the life of Moses. For the first 40 years of his life, he was a prince of Egypt. He had the title, the wealth, and the attention of the most powerful empire on earth. He was definitely chosen first in the eyes of men. But as long as he was in the palace, he was trapped in an identity that didn't belong to him. He was a Hebrew trying to live like an Egyptian. In Exodus chapter 3, we find him in a completely different world. He is on the backside of the desert, tending sheep for his father-in-law, Jethro. He went from the center of the world to the middle of nowhere. For 40 years, no one in Egypt said his name. He was forgotten. He was just a shepherd in the dust. But it was in that long, hidden season, away from the expectations of Pharaoh and the pressure of the palace, that Moses finally became the man God intended him to be. It was in the silence of the desert that he encountered the burning bush. God didn't speak to him in the palace. He spoke to him in the pasture. If Moses had stayed the favorite of Egypt, he would have died as just another forgotten prince. Because he was hidden in the shadow for 40 years, he became the deliverer of a nation. Your years of being overlooked were not a punishment. They were a preservation. God was protecting your soul from the vanity that comes with early fame. He was making sure that your roots went deeper than your reputation. He was giving you the space to develop a character that was sturdy enough to carry the weight of your future calling. The people who were chosen first are often built like a stage, set all front and no foundation. But you are being built like a cathedral. It takes longer. And for a long time, it looks like nothing is happening. But it is built to last for eternity. So the question is not why you were hidden for so long. The question is, what kind of person would you have become if the world had given you everything you wanted before you were ready to handle it? Number 3, the protection of the shadow. God kept you hidden to save your soul from the poison of public expectation. Let's be honest. There is a deep, hidden danger in being the one everyone notices first. When you are the golden child, the favorite student, or the person who always gets the lead role, you begin to live for the reflection in other people's eyes. You start to perform. You learn how to shapeshift into whatever version of yourself will keep the praise coming. You spend so much energy maintaining your image that you never actually have the chance to find your true identity. You become a hollow shell of expectations, terrified of the day when people might stop looking. You have seen this happen to others, haven't you? You watched the siblings or the friends who were chosen first struggle under the weight of always having to be perfect. You saw them panic when they made a single mistake. You saw them lose their original design because they were too busy being what the world demanded they be. But while they were under the hot glare of the spotlight, you were in the cool safety of the shadow. You were allowed to be weird. You were allowed to have interests that didn't make sense to anyone else. You were allowed to fail in private, to cry in private, and to grow in private. Maybe you spent your teenage years alone in your room, reading books that shaped your mind or writing in journals that no one will ever see. Maybe you spent your weekends walking in the woods or working on a hobby that your parents didn't understand. To the people around you, it looked like you were just the quiet one or the loner. But God was using that lack of attention to preserve your original signature. He was making sure that when He finally called you forward, you would be a person of substance, not a person of performance. You don't have to look around the room to see how you should act. You already know who you are because you spent your most formative years with only God as your audience. Maybe that is you. Think about the life of Moses. For the first 40 years of his life, he was a prince of Egypt. He had the title, the wealth, and the attention of the most powerful empire on earth. He was definitely chosen first in the eyes of men. But as long as he was in the palace, he was trapped in an identity that didn't belong to him. He was a Hebrew trying to live like an Egyptian. In Exodus chapter 3, we find him in a completely different world. He is on the backside of the desert, tending sheep for his father-in-law, Jethro. He went from the center of the world to the middle of nowhere. For 40 years, no one in Egypt said his name. He was forgotten. He was just a shepherd in the dust. But it was in that long, hidden season away from the expectations of Pharaoh and the pressure of the palace that Moses finally became the man God intended him to be. It was in the silence of the desert that he encountered the burning bush. God didn't speak to him in the palace. He spoke to him in the pasture. If Moses had stayed the favorite of Egypt, he would have died as just another forgotten prince, because he was hidden in the shadow. For 40 years, he became the deliverer of a nation. Your years of being overlooked were not a punishment. They were a preservation. God was protecting your soul from the vanity that comes with early fame. He was making sure that your roots went deeper than your reputation. He was giving you the space to develop a character that was sturdy enough to carry the weight of your future calling. The people who were chosen first are often built like a stage, set all front and no foundation. But you are being built like a cathedral. It takes longer. And for a long time, it looks like nothing is happening. But it is built to last for eternity. So the question is not why you were hidden for so long. The question is, what kind of person would you have become? If the world had given you everything you wanted before you were ready to handle it, trust in His timing for your soul's preservation. Number 4, the spiritual inheritance of the overlooked. God gave you a treasury that the world's favorites cannot even see. Let me say this straight. In many families and many circles, there is a physical inheritance that follows the favor of men. There is the child who gets the family business. There is the sibling who gets the down payment for the house. There is the golden friend who always seems to have opportunities fall into their lap because of who their father is or what they look like. You have sat on the sidelines and watched this happen for years. You have seen the unfairness of it. You have seen the bank accounts of people who didn't work half as hard as you, simply because they were the first pick of the people in power. You know this feeling intimately. You are the one who had to work through college while your sibling had their tuition paid. You are the one who drives the older car while they get the upgrade. But it goes deeper than money. You have seen them get the benefit of the doubt when they lied, while you were interrogated for telling the truth. You have seen them receive the blessing of the family's name, while you were treated like a stranger at your own dinner table. You have spent a lot of nights feeling like you were born into a deficit. You felt like you started the race 10 miles behind everyone else. And you have been running at a sprint just to stay in the back of the pack. But here is the spiritual reality. When you are denied the physical inheritance of men, God often settles a much larger spiritual inheritance upon you, because you couldn't rely on a trust fund. You had to learn how to trust God. because no one was handing you a career on a silver platter. You had to develop a work ethic that has made you dangerous to the kingdom of darkness. You didn't get the family favor, so you had to seek the favor of the Lord. The favorites are often spiritually bankrupt because they have never had to be hungry. But you are rich in the things that actually matter. You have a treasury of character, a wealth of endurance, and a direct line to the throne of God that was forged in the fire of having nothing else to lean on. Sound familiar? We see this exact dynamic in the story of a woman named Ruth. If you look at the book of Ruth, you see a woman who was never the first choice. She was a Moabitess, an outsider from a nation that was often at odds with Israel. She was a widow with no children and no property. When her mother-in-law, Naomi, decided to go back to Bethlehem, Ruth had absolutely nothing to gain. Her sister-in-law, Orpah, did the sensible thing. She went back to her own people, her own gods, and her own chance at a physical inheritance. Orpah chose what she could see, but Ruth chose what she could not see. In Ruth, chapter 1, verse 16, she makes one of the most famous declarations in the Bible. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Ruth wasn't looking for a paycheck. She was looking for the presence. She traded the comforts of her home for the chance to glean in the leftovers of a foreign field. She spent her days doing back-breaking work in the sun, picking up the grains that the important people dropped. To anyone watching, she was the ultimate outsider, picked last, noticed by no one, working for scraps. But because Ruth was willing to be the unchosen one in the eyes of the world, God chose her for something monumental. She didn't just find a husband in Boaz. She found her way into the very genealogy of Jesus Christ. The woman who started with nothing ended up giving the world everything. Her alternative inheritance was the lineage of the Messiah. If she had stayed in Moab and received the first choice of her people, she would have been a forgotten widow in a pagan land. Because she was overlooked and had to glean in the fields, she became a pillar of the faith. You might not have the house, the title, or the family approval right now. You might feel like you are still gleaning in the leftovers while everyone else eats at the main table. But do not mistake your lack of a physical inheritance for a lack of a divine destiny. God is filling your hands with something that money cannot not buy and death cannot take away. He is giving you a spiritual weight that will outlast every earthly favorite. Let that sit for a moment. Number 5, the sharpening of the inner ear. God used the silence of being ignored to teach you how to hear His voice clearly. Let's say this straight. Constant conversation is often the enemy of deep revelation. When you are the one everyone wants to talk to, your life is filled with noise. You are constantly responding to many voices, answering questions, and managing the opinions of the people chosen first. Your ears are always full of human voices. But when you are the person who is often skipped over, you find yourself in a very specific kind of silence. It is the silence of the uninvited. It is the quiet of the room where no one is asking for your input. You know this feeling intimately. Think about those moments at the dinner table when you started to say something, but someone else talked right over you. You tried once, maybe twice, to get your point across. And then you just slowly closed your mouth. You looked down at your plate and realized that no one even noticed you had stopped talking. Or think about the old scroll where you shared something meaningful, and the next person ignored your message entirely to focus on their own gain. You sat there staring at the lamp, feeling that familiar sting of being invisible. But did you notice what happened in your heart during those moments? Once you stopped trying to compete with the noise, something else began to happen. You started to hear a different frequency. Because you weren't busy performing or defending your place in the conversation, you became aware of the Holy Spirit standing right there with you. In the very moment the world tuned you out, God tuned you in. You began to have internal conversations with your Creator that the favorites never have time for. You started to realize that you don't need a microphone to be heard by the only one who matters. Maybe that is you. You have developed a spiritual hearing that is incredibly sensitive. You can sense the promptings of God because you have had so much practice listening in the quiet, while other people are addicted to the sound of their own names being called. You have become addicted to the still, small voice. This is not a consolation prize. This is the ultimate advantage. The person who can hear God in the silence of rejection is the only person who can follow God into the chaos of a calling. We see this beautifully in the life of a woman named Hannah. In the first chapter of 1 Samuel, we meet a woman who was living in a house of constant noise and comparison. Her husband had another wife named Peninnah, who had many children. The Bible says Peninnah would provoke Hannah year after year, mocking her because she was barren. Hannah was the one being overlooked by life. She was the one who felt ignored by God and ridiculed by her family. In 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 10, we see Hannah in the temple. She was in such deep anguish that she wasn't even speaking out loud. Her lips were moving, but no sound was coming out. She was praying from the depths of her soul. The priest, Eli, saw her and thought she was drunk. He couldn't hear what she was saying, so he assumed the worst. Even in the house of God, the important person in the room didn't understand her. But Hannah didn't need Eli to hear her. She had spent so many years in the silence of her own grief that she had learned how to talk to God in a frequency that the world couldn't touch. God heard her silent prayer and gave her a son named Samuel, who would become the greatest prophet in Israel. Samuel's entire ministry was defined by one phrase: "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." He learned that from a mother who had been ignored by everyone but God. If you are tired of being the person who is never heard, stop trying to turn up to your volume for people. Start turning up your focus on God. The silence you are living in is not a void. It is a classroom. God is teaching you the secret language of the Spirit. He is making sure that when He gives you a word to speak, it won't be a recycled version of what everyone else is saying. It will be a fresh word from the throne room. The world's favorites are often deaf to God because they are so full of themselves. But you are being emptied of human noise, so you can be filled with divine instruction. The person who can sit in the silence without bitterness is the person God can trust with His secrets. Number 6, the sudden presentation. God is preparing a moment where your hidden years become your greatest credential. Here is what nobody tells you about being the person who was never chosen first. There is a specific kind of shock that happens to the world when God finally moves you from the back of the line to the front. People get very comfortable with you, being just the sibling, just the assistant, or just the quiet person in the corner. They have filed you away. They think they have already seen everything you have to offer. They have stopped expecting anything new from you because they assume, but they do not realize that your growth has been happening underground. Think about the way a tree grows. Most of the work happens where no one can see it. For years, the roots are pushing down into the soil, wrapping around rocks, and finding deep sources of water above the ground. The tree might look the same for seasons on end. People walk by it and think it is stagnant. But the moment a storm hits, the trees that grew too fast above the ground are the ones that snap. The tree that spent its time in the dark, building a root system. You know this feeling. You have been building your root system for a long time. You have been studying while others were partying. You have been praying while others were sleeping. You have been learning the nuances of your craft or your calling, while the favorites were busy enjoying their early success. You have a depth of character that cannot be faked. And soon, there will be a shift. A situation is coming that the favorites cannot handle. A problem is coming that requires the specific wisdom you gained in the shadows. And in that moment, the hand of God will reach into the back of the room and pull you forward. Sound familiar? We see this beautifully in the life of a young woman named Esther. If you look at the book of Esther, you see a girl who started with every possible disadvantage. She was an orphan. She was a member of an ethnic minority living in a foreign land. She had no mother or father to advocate for her, no family name to open doors, and no first pick status. In the kingdom of Persia, when the king began searching for a new queen, Esther was just one of hundreds of young women taken into the harem. She was an outsider among outsiders. But Esther had something the other women did not have. She had been raised in the quiet, disciplined shadow of her cousin Mordecai. She had learned how to listen. She had been raised in the quiet, disciplined shadow of her cousin Mordecai. She had learned how to listen. She had learned to be patient. In Esther chapter 2, verse 15, the Bible says that when it was Esther's turn to go before the king, she asked for nothing except what the king's eunuch advised. While every other girl was grabbing for jewelry and expensive robes to make themselves look better, Esther relied on the wisdom she had gained in her years of being hidden. She didn't need decorations. The result was a sudden presentation that changed history. The king didn't just notice her, he loved her more than all the other women. The orphan girl who was never chosen first by the world was chosen first by the king. For a moment, she was born to fulfill. Because she had been prepared in the silence, she had the courage to risk her life, to save her people when the crisis arrived. If she had been a favorite who was used to getting her way, she might have been too selfish to act, because she knew what it felt like to be overlooked. She had the heart of a deliverer. God is not keeping you in the back to hurt you. He is keeping you in the back until the stage is set for a performance that only you can give. The favorites are already playing to the crowd, but you are being saved for the finale. When God finally presents you, people will ask where you came from. They will ask how you know what you know. They will wonder how you stayed so strong, and you will be able to tell them that you didn't get your strength from the spotlight. You got it from the one who was with you when no one else was. So the question is not when it will be your turn. The question is, are you using this hidden time to build the roots that will sustain you when the world finally realizes who you are? You arrived here today believing that your invisibility was a sign of your insignificance. You thought that because the people in your life walked past you. God must have walked past you too. You have spent years looking at the favorites and wondering what you lacked, why you weren't enough, and why your path had to be so much lonelier than theirs. But the truth is simple. You were not abandoned. You were protected. And those are not the same thing. The world defines value by who is chosen first. But God defines value by who He prepares the longest. Your time in the background was not a mistake of the divine schedule. It was a deliberate period of seasoning. You were not being kept from your destiny. You were being kept for it. While others were being spoiled by the praise of men, you were being strengthened by the presence of the Almighty. You have a depth that can only be found in the deep. You have a strength that can only be forged in the fire of being overlooked. To the person who has always been the one holding the camera while everyone else stood in the frame, I want you to know that God has had His eye on you this entire time. To the sibling who felt like a ghost in their own living room, know that your Father has been recording every silent tear and every unacknowledged act of service. He saw you when you felt invisible. He heard you when you were talked over. He was proud of you when you chose to be kind, even when you were treated like an afterthought. Stop looking at the seats you weren't offered at human tables. Stop measuring your worth by the approval of people who cannot even see their own future, let alone yours. The very people who overlooked you are going to be the ones who eventually look to you for strength. They did not see the work God was doing in your heart, but one day they will see the fruit of it. You have been trained in a secret place for a public purpose. You have been given a treasury of wisdom that the first picks will never understand. Today, I want you to lay down the heavy burden of trying to be noticed. You don't have to shout to be heard by the King. You don't have to perform to be loved by the Creator. You are already His priority. You are already His chosen one. He is not waiting for you to become like your siblings, your friends, or your co-workers. He is waiting for you to realize that you are the only version of you that He ever wanted. You were never meant to be defined by the people who stayed. You were meant to be refined by the God who never left. You were never meant to be the backup plan. You were always the hidden gem. You are not a second choice. You are a sacred choice.